And the panels really, so far, have been really fantastic. This morning's panel provided such a perfect setup for a discussion of the media. I really identify with everything that all the speakers said, particularly also what Bernard said about Twitter and Facebook, and Twitter being a very useful medium, but one that has a somewhat more, let's say, elite audience. It tends to be politicians, journalists, or activists who are very engaged in an issue, and Facebook having a more mass audience. And we really see that reflected in the traffic of the Electronic Intifada, which I'm going to talk about. And Noura and Sarah provided such a great setup for the discussion on social media. They really captured all of the key issues of that discussion. So what I'm going to do is simply do some show and tell, because we can see what some of this looks like. And this is the today's front page of the Electronic Intifada. Well, today in America, because it's still the 30th of March there. This is, for those who don't know it, it is an independent online publication that I edit and work with a fantastic team of journalists and writers who are all over the world. We're based in Chicago, but we work with many writers in Palestine. And I'm very grateful for the kind words that were said. But one of the things we've definitely been doing is, you know, we use social media and we also cover what's happening in social media. So I just wanted to talk about some examples of how the work that we do impacts and is impacted by social media. One of the things that was said, and it's very true, is that social media has given Palestinians and others a great deal of direct access and ability to upload videos and photos of what's happening, to bypass the gatekeepers and the censors. But it's also true that it's given Israelis that. And so it's given us a very direct line into what's happening in Israeli society. And one of the sort of iconic examples of that is one that we discovered in 2013. This is actually an image that was posted. It's a real image. It was posted on the Instagram account. Instagram is a social media site where you can upload photos. And this was a real image posted on the Instagram account of an Israeli soldier called Mor Ostrovsky. And it shows, it's a photo he took of him aiming his sniper rifle at the head of a Palestinian boy. We don't know who the Palestinian boy is. We don't know exactly what village this is, but we know it's in the West Bank. And we published this story, and it immediately went viral all over the world and was picked up by world media. So you can see that here it is in The Guardian, and they do credit us. And they say that it was published by us. Here it is in Haaretz, in the Israeli media. They also reported on, I don't know if they actually showed the photo. They have a lot of military censorship there. Here it is in the Irish Times, and you could find it, I'm sure, in Australian media as well. But this was just one of a countless number of examples of the postings by Israeli soldiers. And after that story, we began to really look very closely at social media being produced by Israelis, particularly soldiers. And what we found was really pervasive and systematic genocidal incitement against Palestinians, not by one or two people, not by a small minority, but pretty much on every Hebrew language Facebook page that you could find. Any Israeli news site in Hebrew, you'd look at the comments section, and it was just a relentless stream of truly genocidal incitement. And this was one story of many that we did of this genre. And this was an example of a story of where an Israeli had posted this photo of 3 Palestinian boys who were in a tent, and they were taking part in a protest, a tent encampment, a protest, a peaceful protest called Bab al-Shams, which was established by Palestinians near Jerusalem to protest Israel's theft of Palestinian land. And so someone had posted this image on an Israeli Facebook page and asked, what do you think should happen to these boys? And the stream of violence was just unbelievable. I mean, this was, the headline kind of tells you, and we were not talking about 1 or 2 comments, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of this genre saying that the children should be tortured, killed, shot in the head. And many of these things were being done by other Israeli soldiers and adults, and we documented their comments as well. And we have a whole genre of stories tagged Israelis on Facebook on the Electronic Intifada. So you can go and look at those and see that this, again, this isn't one, I'm not picking 1 or 2 comments. We're talking about a very pervasive pattern. And this got so embarrassing for Israel that the army, Benny Gantz, this is from Ynet, the mainstream Israeli news website, Benny Gantz, who was the chief of staff at the time, in 2013, you see the date here, this is June, we had been publishing a stream of these things, issued new rules for Israeli soldiers on social media to try to control their use, so they would stop basically posting their honest opinions about Palestinians, because this was proving to be such an embarrassment and such a refutation of the claim that these are reluctant, anguished warriors who are the most moral army in the world, but were through social media actually revealing themselves to be a genocidal lynch mob. But it didn't work. So you see that here's another story in Ynet. Pay attention to the date here. This is the first one is from June 2013. The second one, it's almost an identical story, is from June 2015, 2 years later, and the Israeli army is still failing to control the production by Israeli soldiers of embarrassing material. On the other hand, Nora mentioned, and this is very important, I know of no occasion, I mean, you look at the stuff that's being produced, and this is just a small example, the stuff about castrating and burning children and all of this. Nora mentioned that 150 or so Palestinians have been arrested by Israeli occupation authorities, particularly in East Jerusalem, and charged with so-called incitement. So simply saying you support an uprising against a brutal military occupation is incitement as far as Israel is concerned. There's no occasion that I'm aware of any of these soldiers actually inciting genocide or inciting directly for children to have a bullet in their head. I don't know of any example of an Israeli soldier, or any Israeli for that matter, being charged with genocide or arrested, even though this kind of material is pervasive. At the same time, the Israeli military censor is now trying to expand her remit, of course, to Israeli dissidents. And so this is something that just happened in the past couple of months, where a number of Israeli leftists, dissidents, people who have been documenting the crimes of the occupation. It's a very small number. There is a handful of Israelis who do this, very small in number, but important to recognize their voices. And they began receiving notices from the military censor, this was in February, telling them that they had to submit all their Facebook posts that dealt with security to the military censor for prior approval. I don't know if such a thing has ever happened in any other country. Of course, this particular person, Yossi Gurwitz, who writes for a number of publications, including his own blog, said that he wouldn't do that. And nobody knows if the military censor will begin to prosecute Israelis for their Facebook posts. Nora and Sarah also talked about the efforts Israel has made to use social media to put forward its own message. And there's been a lot of that, and I'll say a bit more about that. But often the Israeli government itself, while it's trying to control the soldiers who are embarrassingly telling the truth about the way they feel about Palestinians, is often not much better itself. And this is just one example of something that Israel had posted on its official Arabic Facebook page, because Israel wants to do outreach to Arabs, to the Arab world. And what it is a really racist caricature, two racist caricatures, one of an Asian person and one of an Arab. And then, I don't know if it's supposed to be some kind of joke, but basically it's a racist stereotype about Middle Easterners that they're lazy. If there's the Middle Eastern attitude to work, if there's someone else to do a job, then let them do it. And if no one else can do it, then dude, how do you think I can do it? And this is, posted next to this sort of racist caricature of an Arab. This is an example of the efforts that the Israeli government's outreach to the Arab world. Now this, as was also mentioned, during the war in Gaza, the last war in 2014, Palestinians were doing an incredible job of reaching out directly, of using social media. And this is an article by Bilal Dabour, who's a young doctor in Gaza, and he was working at Al-Shifa Hospital during the massacre. And he wrote this article for us, and he made the case, which I agree with, that in the social media war, if you want to call it that, the Palestinians are winning. And we had some hard numbers to show that. So you can see that Palestinians created a hashtag Gaza under attack. For those who don't know what a hashtag is, it's simply a marker that you might put in a Facebook status or a tweet that is then easy to find other tweets or postings about the same subject. But if you count the number of times you use this hashtag, people are using this hashtag, you can see how popular that topic is. Sometimes it's sort of an indirect measure for a point of view. So what you can see, this is over a period of a month in July to August during the massacre in Gaza. And you can see that the orange line, which is the Gaza under attack hashtag, which generally was being used by people who are supporting Palestinians, was being tweeted out hundreds of thousands of times a day. And then the Israeli social media Hasbara effort, they created an Israel under attack hashtag to try to sort of compete and generate sympathy for Israel. And you can see that the number of tweets doesn't even register on the scale of this graph. We're talking about more than 4 million tweets for Gaza under attack and 46,000 for Israel under attack. So that's really a direct visual measure of the differences. Now, by the way, I mentioned Bilal and that he's really a great writer, and I just wanted to show you another story that he did, which this was a photo that had circulated very widely in social media of a boy being brought into Al-Shifa hospital during the war and just clinging to the paramedic. He was so terrified, he didn't want to let go. And Bilal happened to witness this. He happened to be working in the emergency room at the time, and he told this story on the Electronic Intifada. This article that we have up right now, I think it was one of our top read stories. Within a few days, it was read more than 500,000 times on the Electronic Intifada. And it's another example of how the media, how a story that, you know, can be published by us or by other independent media can really go global. And this particular one was a big hit in Australia. And I'm going to see if I can find it. Here it is in the Sydney Morning Herald. See if it comes, luckily I'm still online here. So that's loading. But we saw this time after time with these stories that we would put them up, and this is what we were talking about, that social media can be an important story. And you can see that here it is in the Sydney Morning Herald. Palestinian boy clings to paramedic, and there's the picture, and it says that it was first published in the Electronic Intifada, and it repeats Bilal's story. So that's one example of a number that shows how we, as independent media, being very forthright about who we are, can have a big impact on mainstream media as well. And Bilal's story was absolutely fantastic. Now, I could spend an hour talking about the millions of dollars, the consultants, the international summits that Israel has to try to shape its messaging, and particularly to target young people. And a lot of that is done through social media efforts to appeal to various audiences and so on. And Israel, I write about this in my book in more detail, but Israel basically has a problem, which is that it relies on Western support, particularly American support. And, you know, if you go back 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that support was very pervasive across the society, left, right, Democrat, Republican, young, old. And what's happened, and this is happening in Europe as well, and I think in Australia too, is that support for Israel it's becoming more and more of a niche issue. And in the United States, basically, and I'll show you a table that illustrates this in a minute, you know, basically the older you are and the whiter you are, the more pro-Israel you are. Of course, we're talking about averages, but that's, you know, there are lots of older white people who are very supportive of Palestinian rights. We know that. But we're talking about broad sort of averages. And so there's a particular effort on messaging that Israel thinks will appeal to young people, particularly a strategy that critics that we've called pinkwashing, the effort to portray Israel as generally progressive, particularly that it's pro-LGBTQ rights, that it's feminist, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of this is based on fabrications and lies. And again, I talk about that in the book. But, you know, the point is that the message, they're trying to message Israel to be attractive. And in one recent effort, or one recent sort of analysis of this, they had a summit a couple of weeks ago in Jerusalem with sort of key leaders of the propaganda or Hasbara organizations, and they found these strategies are not working, and all the efforts to reach young people through social media, etc., are not working. And the messaging that Israel is young and hip, that you can go there and see scantily clad women on the beach, is not working, and it's even turning off young Jewish, young American Jews. And a key finding, which is from the Republican pollster, high-profile Republican pollster, Frank Luntz, that only 42% of Jewish students in the US believe that Israel wants peace. Just 39% view Israel as a civilized and Western country. and a mere 31% consider Israel to be a democracy. And two other key, and they quoted one participant who was unnamed saying, you know, the messaging, we have girls in bikinis, we have beaches, we have beer and bars, come to us, does not work. And another key message that comes out of the research was that constantly emphasizing the Holocaust and that Israel is sort of, you know, justified by the Holocaust doesn't work either, that it turns people off. And so Israel is really struggling to find messages that can work. This was a story one that I'm particularly proud of, I have to say, was an example of where we were able to use social media you know, as a it really was a vulnerability for Israel. This is Ayelet Shaked. At that time, she was a member of parliament, and she published a post on her Facebook page, really calling for outright genocide of Palestinians. You can read the whole post here. We translated it in full. We have professional translators who work for us. My Hebrew is pretty good, but when it comes to something like this, we want to make sure it's absolutely right and impeccable. And we published it, and again, this went viral. It was picked up, you know, the Daily Mail, terrible newspaper, but it's read by millions of people every day. They picked up this story, and so it was seen by, you know, occasionally they get it right, you know, they do a story right. And Ayelet Shaked became known. If you start typing her name on Google, you know, it autofills genocide as the first thing. That's because of us. Well, she became Minister for Justice after this. So, I mean, in Israel, calling for genocide gets you a promotion. But, you know, the New York Times had to do a puff piece on her to try and repair the damage. You know, they're doing their best, but I think we helped expose her. These are just more examples of the social media that we're able to monitor and pick up that again shows Israeli soldiers and others, not just soldiers, really using their social media. What's so interesting, we discovered, maybe I shouldn't give this away, is that Israelis seem to think that Hebrew is a secret code. And that if you say something in Hebrew, no one else in the world will know what you said. And so they speak very, very freely in Hebrew, open incitement to genocide, and they think, oh, it's just among us. Of course, we monitor what's going on in Hebrew very closely, and then they're absolutely shocked to learn that, you know, they're then featured on the Electronic Intifada. Israel has tried, and this was mentioned, Israel has tried to counteract. I showed you those hashtags, 4 million to 46,000. It's like 1% or 1/10 of 1%? I think mathematics works differently in the Southern Hemisphere. But Israel has set up, this is just, you know, we've done a number of stories on this, but this actually goes back before the last war in Gaza. Even, you know, we can trace the beginnings of this back almost a decade to Israel setting up covert units. And this is all done often in complicity with Israeli universities that will provide spaces, computers, and they will bring in kind of like people to sit there, students to sit there all night and systematically type comments on Facebook posts or to, you know, to attack people who are, you know, critical of Israel. And this was actually another great example of the Israelis thinking that, you know, if it's in Hebrew, no one will know. This was actually an Israeli TV report which was all about how fantastic this is. Look at what we've set up. We've set up this social media war room. We've got all these students here. We're telling them what to type. This is fantastic. Of course, I mean, when you actually show it to the world, most people are like horrified that, you know, a government and universities are actually doing this. This is the kind of the crudest type of organized propaganda that any government can do. And this was in 2013. As I said, this goes further back, and there's absolutely no evidence that any of it is working, that no matter what resources they put in. Again, remember, the young people that they are employing, and in cases they are employing, we also discovered a scheme where the Israeli National Union of Students was actually paying students to post positive messages about Israel on Facebook. You know, these are the same students who are going to the army and, you know, posting all this other vile stuff, and they're not really well equipped to deal with fact-based criticism of Israel. So the efforts are really ineffectual. Another impact of the internet more broadly is you know, not strictly social media, but the availability of video and the fact that now most people have videos in their phones and so on. This isn't a phone camera. I'm not going to show the video because it's quite disturbing. But this was actually an example. This video was taken on May 15th, 2014, and that was Nakba Day. And it shows two Palestinian youths being shot dead in cold blood by snipers. And they were not doing anything, not that anything justifies shooting teenagers, but there was no plausible justification. I mean, they were just standing there and they were shot dead like hunted animals. And this video it documented it. CNN camera captured the other angle where they actually captured the shooters. This was an incredibly well-documented killing, just like the one last week in Hebron, which you may have heard of, where an Israeli soldier is filmed executing a Palestinian at point-blank range. And sometimes we have a sort of a belief, a hopeful belief, an optimistic belief, that, you know, if the proof is there, if all the evidence is there, then, you know, justice will somehow be done. And what we see time and again, even though these killings, these cold-blooded executions, cases where it looks like a knife is being planted, whatever it is, a court on video. And of course, the Israeli spokesmen say, I know there's some folks here from New South Wales, Vic Al-Hadef, the head of the New South Wales Board of Jewish Deputies, with whom I'm not popular. Before I got my visa, he was quoted in I think it was the Australian, saying not very complimentary things about me. But he tweeted the other day when I tweeted something about the video of the most recent video in Hebron. He tweeted, well, this is terrible, but, you know, unlike in the Palestinian Authority, where they glorify terrorists, in law-abiding democratic Israel, this person will be brought to justice. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of what he said. Of course, that's not true. This was 2 years ago, and the news today, I had that up. Yeah, this news was published today that Israel has closed that investigation into the killing of one of the boys, Muhammad Abu Tahir, with no charges against anyone. And that's the case time after time after time. So the reason I'm saying this is to say that, you know, these tools are very powerful, but they're not all powerful, and they don't always or even often produce the accountability we want. Nonetheless, I think it's very, very important that we can directly show the world what is happening. Two things to finish is, you know, a question we had earlier, is any of this making a difference? And I think that it is. We had that question in the first panel. This is one poll, and of course you always have to be careful with looking at one poll, but this poll is very consistent with surveys that we've seen over the past couple of years, time and again. In the United States, this particular poll was taken by Gallup, And you can see the dates, July 22, 2014. So this was in the midst of the attack on Gaza. And it's asking Americans whether they think the Israeli attack is justified or not. And what you see is something very interesting here, what I mentioned. Among whites, 50% say it's justified and a third say it's unjustified. Among non-whites, it's the reverse. Only 25 say it's justified, and just about half say the Israeli attack is unjustified. Among youth, you see that only a quarter think Israel's attack is justified, and more than half think it's not. And when you go to the older age groups, again, it's almost exactly the reverse. And I actually think, and another part of this story that's important, is that the numbers saying the Israeli attacks are justified, even where it's, the biggest group, are historically low. They're struggling to get to 50%, where, in the past it would have been 60, 70, 80%. So we see this shift in opinion reflected in surveys and in other ways. We see it reflected in the discourse of the pro-Israel groups that are saying, we're losing the young, even the Jewish young. We're losing people of color. Those Palestinians, they're making alliances with black people and Black Lives Matter, and all this is very dangerous to us. So it's sometimes hard when you look at the view from 30,000 feet to see any change. You listen to Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or Donald Trump and you say, it's hopeless. Things are never going to change. But when you actually delve a little deeper, you see that the social and demographic and political trends in the United States are actually quite hopeful and positive for those of us who support justice in Palestine, because this is the ascendant coalition in the United States. You can't win power in the United States anymore without being able to appeal to a broad, multicultural, and diverse constituency. So that's really, really good news. And this, again, this is one poll, but I stress that these are trends that we see more broadly. Finally, just because Ramzy sadly isn't with us, I wanted to make sure to mention Palestine Chronicle, which is the website he edits, and which also plays a very important role. And just to note that, one of the great things about the internet is that there's a lot out there. There's diversity. There's the Electronic Intifada, Palestine Chronicle. I know that in this room we have people who've written for Mondo Weiss and others, and that diversity is a strength because they can't come after all of us. And finally, well, they can try. Finally, I wanted to say that if you want to join the Electronic Intifada mailing list, I encourage you to do that. Go to the Electronic Intifada, click Get Updates, and you'll be asked to put in your email address. We don't share it with anyone. You can unsubscribe at any time. We won't make you stay on it forever if you don't like it. And it's only one email a day, and it's a great way to stay in touch. I'm really proud of the fact that we publish a lot of young Palestinian writers, particularly in Gaza, a lot of Palestinian photographers who are telling their stories their own way. And it's just a joy to be involved in it. But I cannot wait for the day when this work is no longer necessary and I can do something else completely. But I will never give up the fight until that day. Thank you.